So, for those who have been dealing with and handling the Wisdom of Odin stuff for a while, you know that there's some issues where his particular brand of polytheism is concerned. I'm kind of suspecting that there's a little bit of, like, atheopaganism there, not actual polytheism, because all of the stuff that he said in the last video I covered basically sounded like it could have been ripped right out of the God Delusion. His understanding of paganism was ripped right out of that, but it turns out there's actually another book that he grabs some of his understanding from, but that one has its own issues. And as I am not the person who's actually read it or dealt with it, I decided I would go ahead and bring on somebody who has, because that would be a lot more honest and a lot better than me trying to handle that all on my own. So with that said, Aliakai is here with me, and she will be helping with this.
So, first off, as far as the atheopaganism goes, I agree with you that at the very least he seems to be struggling with figuring out what his position is on that. I know that he hangs around with a lot of atheopagan friends, one of which is a major stan of the AFA. So there could be a lot of influence there. I'm the last person to question anybody's faith in the gods or not. Like, that's between you and them. But I do know that he does seem hell-bent on mythic literalism from a lot of his videos, and reconciling that with science seems to be a huge struggle for him, which is very confusing to me as a fellow pagan and as a Hellenist, because science is sacred in Hellenism. So, like, this idea of, like, needing to find some kind of atheopagan position in order to reconcile the two is really confusing. But also, the fact that he would reference books that stan neo-Nazis as well until you realize who he pals around with is also a bit confusing. His whole thing with Hyperborea, we're referring to a video that he did fairly recently. I need to go pull up the title for it. I'm pretty sure you've got... I
actually have the video here. The video is called Norse Paganism, What Do We Do When We Do Not Know? And the book in question is Beyond the North Wind, The Fall and Rise of the Mystic North.
Yeah, and this book is a little bit troublesome, in part because of the fact that it's very, very wishy-washy. So for those of you who don't know, that book purports to be about the particular Norse variation on shamanism. And the person who wrote it, it's not actually really even about shamanism, it's about Hyperborea. And Hyperborea, as a Hellenist, I was shocked when I started reading that book and started figuring out that it was actually this whole-ass neo-Nazi conspiracy theory, because Hyperborea is actually a Greek term. It means north of Boreas, which means basically north of the known Greek world, north of where the North Wind was said to dwell. There was an idea that there were civilizations there that were not Greek, that were the descendants of the gods and such. But that's a Greek concept. What happened was the neo-Nazis, or rather the Nazis themselves, the Nazis latched on to this idea of a northern civilization and kind of birthed this myth that effectively all of Western European culture, including things like agriculture, didn't come from Africa. They actually came from the north, namely Scandinavia. That was a very well-timed Raz cackle. So that's kind of why when I first discovered that this was the case, I was so confused as a Hellenist, because Hyperborea is our thing, and they turned it into a white supremacy conspiracy narrative. And so that book actually references this and attempts to defend it.
You should probably also bring up Julius Evola as well.
Yeah, so Evola was actually very, very fond of this idea. Now, Evola is not something I know quite as much about, again, because this is not my particular pagan path. But the whole thing with Evola was that Evola was a white supremacist as well.
I actually have his Wikipedia page pulled up as well.
Yeah, so you can go ahead and read off of the Wikipedia page a little bit if you want to kind of give a little bit of that background, because a lot of ideas for Hyperborea actually came from Evola, and also Evola is part of the reason that particular books around that idea became popularized. He also, like, has a lot to do with some of the ideas that Wu puts forward in that video.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the national mysticism portion of the page where he's concerned. It says, for his spiritual interpretation... Here, we're going to actually zoom this in a little bit so people can maybe read a little bit of it. I hate zooming in on Wikipedia. It always makes it impossible to actually read anything afterwards. Here we go. For his spiritual interpretation of the different racial physicalities, Evola found the work of German race theorist Ludwig Ferdinand Claus invaluable. Like Evola, Claus believed that the physical race and spiritual race could diverge as a consequence of miscegenation. Evola's racism included racism of the body, soul, and spirit, giving primacy to the latter factor, writing that races only declined when their spirit failed. And this is actually something that we can understand very easily if we already know about the AFA and how they believe that gods are easier to worship based on the purity of your white bloodline.
Yeah, actually, expanding a little bit on that, McNallen in particular put forward this idea, not just that the gods were easier to worship, but also that you could connect directly to them through your bloodline, because there are such a thing as race souls. Now, I do not believe this. 100%, I do not fucking believe this. It is horrible, but part of the reason why, if you see a Norse pagan talking about Wotan, W-O-T-A-N, as opposed to Woten or Woden, W-O-T-E-N or W-O-T or D-E-N, Wotan is both a Jungian idea of, like, kind of the spirit of the Germanic people, but it was also grabbed by McNallen and neo-Nazis to represent the quote-unquote fighting German spirit, or the race soul of Germany.
Which is something that McNallen references back to when he says that that Germans are now supposed to be workers, and they're supposed to be helpers, and they need to go back to their roots of being warriors and being strong. And what the quiet part that he's not saying out loud is when he thought that they embodied that spirit the best, like in World War II, when they were killing Jews.
Well, and since you had me on for the YSCE, so some of your audience might be familiar with this, Racias, who is the founder of the YSCE, I don't know if he ever met McNallen, but he definitely knew of his ideas. There is an interview in which he states that the Greek race soul is more refined than the wild, barbaric German race soul. And that's why he felt that certain other ethnicities should not practice Hellenism without, quote, Hellenizing, because their race soul was naturally that way.
And Wolf the Red just pointed out that Wotan is also anacronymed into Will of the Aryan Nation. Which
I did not actually know that. Thank you so much, Wolf.
Which is, well, we'll go ahead and say that that's telling.
Press F to pay respect for my sanity, chat. So, coming back to this idea of Hyperborea, generally, if you see it talked about in Hellenist circles, it's very rare to see it talked about in the neo-Nazi sort of sense, but, like, the core of this theory is that, you know how, from what we understand from, actual history and science, agriculture most likely started in, it came to be simultaneously in the Mesopotamian region, but also in Africa and, spread throughout Europe, right? Like we have evidence of the Nile River Valley and cultivation there, and we have evidence of highly advanced civilizations, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean, developing in Africa and other places where primarily brown people live, things like the pyramids and other things like that. Well, the idea of Hyperborea is that that's not actually the case, that there was either a different species of hominid that interbred or a different line of peoples that actually were the ones who spread all those civilizing influences, everything from writing and reading to oral storytelling to agriculture, all of that from the north to the south, rather than, you know, the actual facts, which is that hominids emerged from Africa and a lot of our development took place there.
And considering that Wu, I have not covered this in a video yet, but for those who don't know, apparently Wisdom of Odin doesn't believe that humans evolved from primates. His argument is that the skeletons don't match up perfectly, even though we match up almost bone for bone with bonobos. But apparently, based on the last video that we covered of Wisdom of Odin, that thought process at least makes a little sense because it's more convenient for him to ignore the science so long as he can pretend it's magic.
Oh, Ocean actually did an excellent live stream on that on his channel on the Omnipotent Beard last night with Gutsip Gibbon. If you guys want a really thorough dissection of that entire train wreck, that's over there. Go check it out. He did a fantastic fucking job. He also seems to think that giants, a race of giant hominids, ruled over the Native Americans.
For some reason.
He cited a discredited book from the 1800s about finding a bunch of giant 9-foot-tall mummies in a catacomb under Kentucky, which he also claimed in that video that there were no Native Americans in Kentucky when the white people got here, which, like, press F to pay respects for my sanity as a Native American, please, chat. Apparently we didn't exist in an entire area of the United States when white people got here. Who knew?
And isn't it kind of contradictory, too, for him to go, giants were here, giants ruled over the Native Americans weren't here?
Yeah, I mean, did we ever say he was consistent?
No, especially not
wrong, maybe.
Especially not after the last video that we covered. Again, I feel horrible for any recently converted pagan who decides that this person is going to be their window in. Just
well,
no.
And he mostly targets that audience. Like, his entire shtick started as, I'm going to record my journey, and then he rapidly kind of transformed into a cult leader. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, Suris actually mirrored the video expose that I did on that. I kind of started a lot of the looking into Wu along with Ocean and Wolf because I had a hardcore problem with, like, Ocean and Wolf were the ones who helped convince me to make my initial video. But we kind of started looking into him when Ocean first, like, posted about his gatherings and how dangerous they are and how he's flouting COVID restrictions and everything. And I ended up launching the first video about his cult stuff because after I reposted something that Ocean said about that, a bunch of ex-members of his server contacted me with screenshots about some fucked up shit that he did. And so I ended up feeling like I needed to do something about that, like, as an ally. And I'm really, really glad that we have been able to get as much information as we have, because he's got some really dangerous ideas, and he's very clearly, as Ocean pointed out in his video, not willing to denounce the AFA at all. In fact, he emphasizes the words, I don't openly support them. Like, why would you say the word openly unless you support them somehow?
Well, and then, of course, he's asking McNallen himself for advice on ritual. And remember, this is the same individual who is now telling other people how to be a pagan, how to be a polytheist, when the dude's asking neo-Nazis about how to do it properly.
Well, and he's also hanging around with Forrest Munden, who is a notorious white supremacist, who also has used the T-slur on trans people. You know, and this happened in a live stream that Wu was in, and he laughed right along with him. You know, I'm not going to say the slur, but you all know which one I'm talking about. He said that Loki was not that, and that, quote, that slur need to stop inserting, you know, their transgender ideology into Norse myth. Which, if anybody who's even looked at a cursory glance at Norse mythology is like, you're full of every inch of shit. But, you know, just like every last bit of you, it's like falling out of your fucking ears at this point. But coming back to kind of this idea of Hyperborea, it should not have been as surprising as it was that he pushed forward this book that basically puts out this idea that, like, oh, brown people didn't actually start the cradle of civilization. Humans actually might have started in the north and spread from there. It's this entire desire to recontextualize history around yourself. And when you pair that with, as Ocean pointed out last night, the fact that he also tries to state that all gods are actually the same, this crazy version of soft polytheism where he claims that like Zeus and Odin are the same god, you know, which is maddening to anybody who knows anything about either of those deities. Like, it feels like he's trying to concentrate more and more power into his own hands, and he's almost kind of like PewDiePie is for the alt-right, but for the AFA. He basically tiptoes around everything so that the dog whistles, like, he's basically dog whistling the Nazi fucking anthem, but at a pitch that only the Nazis can hear.
He's the useful idiot.
That the rest of us pick that up.
He's the useful idiot for the AFA.
Well, I don't even know if he's a useful idiot at this point, considering he put forward Hyperborea straight up. And a couple months ago in a Q&A, when he was asked, can other races worship the gods? He said, that's a complicated question. Can other races worship the gods? Well, you should probably look at your own ancestry first.
Which is exactly what the AFA teaches.
Drink from your own well. Yeah, but the most telling thing, apart from the, I don't openly support them, well, clearly you support them in some measure then, otherwise you wouldn't have said that. But the other most telling thing is his constant refrain of gathering the folk. On the AFA's website itself, it says we need to create an ingathering of the folk. The fact that he's using exactly that same language after having attempted to contact Stephen McNallen, hanging around folkists like Mund and Forests, and now putting forward Hyperborea as a form of shamanism, which if you read the book that he references, it has nothing to do with real shamanism, like, at all. It's about 90% about this idea of civilization spreading from the north. Like,
it's white
pretty
greatness,
damn
basically.
hard not to conclude at that point that he's a racist who just doesn't want to put forward the idea that he's a racist. In my opinion, it's pretty damn hard not to conclude that. When you look at all of the evidence and you look at it in context and you look at it across areas, especially given that after he was called out for this, he also put forward this whole post about, you know, who gets to sit at the table, and it still doesn't actually condemn the AFA or any of their ideas. He just condemns the, quote, idea of bigotry and includes bigotry against an individual, quote unquote, which, like, being against somebody's idea is not harassment. Like, that's a hot take, but, like, criticizing your fucking ideas is not the same as criticizing your personhood, dude. If you're sending every message to racists that you're racist, if you're palling around racists, if you're putting forward racist books and racist ideas, if you've got racist shit on your fucking bookshelf in the background, if you're hanging around racists and not calling them out for their racism when they racist around you, how am I not supposed to think that you're a fucking racist? Like, what other conclusion does anybody else have?
And the argument,
I can say he's at least complicit in racism, but, like, what else is there? How is that functionally different from being racist yourself?
And the argument that I've seen put forth by his constituents is that, no, their Discord isn't transphobic, or their Discord isn't racist because they allow anybody in. But the problem is that they allow anybody in if they're paying the fee. That's the other weird thing, is that his religion, the cult he's building around himself, is applicable. You can get into it by paying a fee through Patreon to get onto his Discord. Now, normally, a patron-only Discord is not a problem, but when you're locking a religious community behind a paywall, that, if you didn't want to sound like a cult, maybe you shouldn't have made tithing part of things.
Well, and not only that, but this is an extra layer to that. Originally, and I pointed this out in my video, but I want to hammer it home again since I'm here and I'm going to have to leave in a minute or two.
We've only got another minute for the recording anyways.
Yeah, the thing I want to really hammer home about that is that he originally said that his Patreon was actually money for a hall, which is basically like a heathen temple. He wanted to buy land and build a hall, and his entire, like, tagline is "Skull until the hall," right? But about, like, 6 to 8 months later, he does this whole big coming out post on his Patreon that I was sent by some of the people that were in there. And he does this whole video on his channel about, you know, I'm gonna quit my job and do YouTube full time. Now all of a sudden, these people who are contributing to him have a choice to make. They can either, if they wanted all of their money to go to the hall and that's what they were promised, they can either quit supporting him and lose their religious community, which he's actively discouraged people from finding other ones, or they can continue to support something that they don't believe in and pay this guy's bills in order to stay in that religious community. And some of them are probably indoctrinated enough that they ended up choosing the latter option and ended up being happy for it. But to me, putting somebody in that position in the first place is fucked.
Agreed. If you, it's basically, I know I've got a lot of people in the chat who are saying, can Telltale do a video on him? Can Telltale do a video on him? Basically, one of the things that Telltale would bring up here, were he here, is that one of the things that the bite model specifically says would qualify you as a cult is engaging in shunning. And if you are not able to financially support this individual, you are shunned out of the community functionally. They can try to wiggle around it and say, we're not shunning people, we're not telling people to leave, but they get booted when they can't pay, so it is shunning behind a paywall. That's exactly what it is.
Well, and there's also, like, and I'm gonna finish this out before I head out, because I know you said we needed to finish, but I need to get this one in too.
Yeah.
You want to talk about shunning. Now, I do not know the full story behind this, but I am suspicious of it, given the way that they framed Ocean and Wolf in the gigantic... I've been calling it, along with Ocean coined the term the Jakob Saga for it. There's this manifesto history of the folk that is on their server that somebody sent me. It's a PDF file. And Ocean coined the term the Jakob Saga because it's 90% about him and his life and how he became a Norse pagan and all this other stuff. But there's also an entire page devoted to Ocean and Wolf having gone into his Discord and questioned his use of the term woo-woo as a positive thing that basically meant spirituality. There's also another one in there from a person named Wrecker who apparently had suspicions about one of the admins. And I don't know the full story behind this, but the way that it was framed was that this guy had, like, feelings for a chick, and that, you know, he was concerned that those two people were, you know, like, playing with her feelings. And so he brought it up to Jacob and was promptly exiled from the community. And those are the words from it, like, exiled, chose to live in exile from the community. And he popped into my comments section and said that, like, he had a major problem with how that was being portrayed. But if you want to talk about stunning, we actually have evidence in that PDF that they put out themselves as propaganda to their cults that, like, shunning is not only advised, it's an outright built-in part of that cult structure. Like, it's not just monetary shunning, it is outright actual social shunning. No, this guy was kicked out for criticizing leadership. Yeah, and again, I don't know anything surrounding that, so I can't say what the quote-unquote true story is. But what I can say is that that has major red flags, that somebody criticized the leadership and then got thrown under the fucking bus for it, and that they felt the need to not only, you know, document that, but document it in a cult propaganda document that is supposed to be a recording of their movement. The fact that that got an entire, like, page along with Ocean and Wolf is extremely telling. Cults need enemies.
And Wolf and Ocean make very convincing enemies in this case. I mean, granted, I can understand. Ocean makes a very convincing enemy. I get that. Also, yes, I know I was muted before. I am sorry, everybody. With that said, though, I do think we need to wrap up at least this segment. Thank you, Aliakai, for coming on and contextualizing some of that, because I know that I was maybe freaking out a little bit about how I was going to cram all the information that I had just had dumped on me 5 minutes before the stream.
Yeah, that was not the best way to handle that, was it?
No. So I was like, you know what? I can do criticizing a single person in a single video. I cannot do going into the entire history of a book I have not read, of a religious practice that has been adopted by neo-Nazis. I cannot do any of that. Not in any meaningful way. Let me get somebody who can. Hold on.
Well, hopefully I was able to contextualize that. I just barely kind of dipped into the surface. If you guys want to look into that further, I'm sure that Ocean or Wolf can answer questions over in the Discord server. But yeah, like the too long didn't read is that Hyperborea is basically like a Nazi conspiracy theory that civilization actually came from the North, MK, because the brown people could never come up with it on our own.
Which is gross. With all that said, if you guys are watching this right now, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe over to Aliakai's channel and Wolf's channel and Ocean's channel and Callan's channel for that matter. About all of them, everybody who is there and is going to be staring and pagan at me in the chat. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. It means the world to me. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, please do all that fun stuff. With all that said, everyone, don't fall for cult bullshit. Insert end of video tagline here.